The Boer War, 1899–1902. It is now 100 years since. The Dutch colony on the Cape of Good Hope, the first white settlement in Africa, was taken over by the Britons, or the British, for strategic reasons in 1815. The Dutch had been perforce Napoleon's allies, and therefore on the losing side after Waterloo. The Brits therefore took over a coherent community of mainly Dutch Calvinist colonists. The Boers are not, as they were known, Boers or farmers in Dutch. They're not entirely Dutch by blood, because they were intermixed with French and German Protestants, which is why some Afrikaners have French names, and although they would hate to admit it, they probably have a certain infusion of black blood from earlier on. But Dutch predominates, although the dialect had become rather different and is now present-day Afrikaans from official Dutch. And, of course, the Dutch colonists naturally resented being ruled by the British. And the British did not take to the Dutch particularly, who they regard as obscurantists, narrow-minded Calvinists, and relatively uneducated. So in 1838 you have the great trek of certain Boers to the interior, northeast, the famous Oxwagon Walk, and when they get to a suitable place on the Transvaal River, they found the two little republics of the Orange Free State and the Transvaal. And there for several decades they are left much to themselves until the 1880s. The British have at that time no great expansionist ambitions into the African interior. The Cape of Good Hope is fine for them, beautiful Mediterranean climate, etc., strategically important, and so on. But in the 1880s things change. There's the great imperial expansion of all European powers. Britain needed the Boer republics for strategic reasons, if only to stop the Germans getting them, or establishing a protectorate over them. The Boers themselves preferred the Germans, who they regarded as closer racially and religiously, and anyway, the Germans were not British. They preferred them to the British. You have the ambitions of Rhodes, the diamond millionaire, gold millionaire, who's now the Prime Minister of Cape Colony, the ambitions of the Colonial Secretary, Joe Chamberlain, etc. I mentioned diamonds. There's sudden wealth in the Transvaal. Diamond mines are discovered. This changes the Transvaal from bankrupt semi-rusticity into quite a rich little place. It's the equivalent to finding oil in an impoverished desert sheikhdom 70 years later. The Transvaal, and to a less extent the Orange Free State, was now valuable. So the British start putting pressure on the two Boer republics. There are several issues. The Uitlander issue, the treatment of the Uitlanders. The Uitlanders were non-Boers, mainly British, but they needn't be British, who came there to run and exploit the diamond mines, but were treated by the Boers as not exactly even citizens, deprived, they alleged, of civil rights by the Boers, and they were not allowed to vote or anything. They were just allowed to work. In fact, one can feel in hindsight less sorry for the Uitlanders than they claimed to feel for themselves, because they were making a lot of money through being in the Transvaal. They didn't have to be there. They hadn't been taken there as slaves. As the Boer president Kruger said, "This is my country, these are my laws. Anyone who doesn't like my laws can leave my country." But the British had great sympathy, as you might expect, for the Uitlanders, fanned by the press of the day. And the British claimed that the Boers had already accepted a light British protectorate. In 1879, the Boers of the Transvaal had felt menaced by the then powerful Zulu kingdom, native Zulu kingdom, and had sought British help, and the British had exacted the price that they should place themselves vaguely under the umbrella of the British Empire. But the Boers claimed that that had only been a temporary agreement. Anyway, negotiations on these two issues broke down partly because the British wanted it to. Chamberlain and Rhodes, as far as we can see, wanted war. They wanted to settle these cheeky Dutch farmers once and for all. And at first, however, the Boers had considerable military success because they went on the attack. First, the British were caught by surprise, didn't have that many troops in South Africa. However, of course, at that time the British Empire was probably the greatest power in the world. Troops from both India and Britain were sent out there, and once reinforcements had arrived, the Boers, for whatever their skill and their knowledge of the country might be, could not win conventionally. Once you had UK troops there in great numbers. So by 1900 they'd been defeated conventionally after bitter and impressive resistance, and the war was declared over by the British. Unfortunately, the Boers hadn't read the textbook, and for 2 years the Boers impressed with their heroic and skillful guerrilla warfare on the veldt, which of course they knew intimately, and the British knew not at all. They had certain other advantages. The other great powers, France, Germany, Russia and America, you name them, took the side of the Boers and heartily disapproved of Britain's action, partly out of self-interest, as Britain aggrandising her empire even more, partly out of genuine compassion. The whole thing looked very much like a classic David against Goliath. International sympathy for the Boers were increased when the British instituted concentration camps. Now then, this was the first time the name was used. They're emphatically not meant to be like the concentration camps of the Nazis or of the Stalinists. The big idea was to round up the Boer women and children from the farms on the veldt, and concentrate them in camps so that the women folk could stop supplying their menfolk with food and general comfort when the menfolk were out fighting, to cut off the Boer fighters' source of supplies. The problem was, once you'd herded the Boer people into the camps, everything was badly thought out, sanitary arrangements were primitive, people who'd been used to leading a healthy life in the veldt caught diseases from each other very easily when they were concentrated together in numbers of thousands. All that sort of thing, and many Boer women and children died. Secondly, the British hadn't organised enough food, so there was also malnutrition, which hastened death. And photography was well developed, of course, by that time, so the European public, including the British public, were treated to pictures of white women and children looking very much like themselves, either looking emaciated and half-starving, very ill, or indeed dead. And this caused a great outcry. In fact, it caused an outcry in Britain itself. Many liberals started to speak up for and defend the Boers, including the leader of the Liberal Party, Campbell Bannerman, and an up-and-coming young Liberal politician, the Welshman Lloyd George. Lloyd George spoke for ending the war and for compromise with the Boers in Joe Chamberlain's Birmingham. As a result, he nearly got lynched himself. He had to go through the back door of the hall disguised as a policeman. The Boers were forced to give in 1902, and the peace terms the British awarded them were rather generous. And this led the way to the federation of the Cape Colony, Natal, and the Orange Free State and Transvaal into the Dominion of South Africa within a few years. The Boer guerrilla leaders become responsible South African statesmen, rather loyal to the Crown. The most obvious example of this is General Smuts, who was, in old age, was Prime Minister of South Africa up to 1948 and receives the King and Queen, now Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and I believe he also received the present Queen, which is young Princess Elizabeth. On the whole, however, the Boers were unreconciled to British rule, Afrikaners as they came to be known. So what is the legacy of the Boer War? It fuelled the historico-myth of Afrikanerdom. Every society has a historico-myth, needs one, which is different from actual objective academic history. It fuelled their self-image of heroic fighters. Yeah, there are the ingredients in it, the great trek itself, the Calvinism and everything. And for a time, the Boers in fact won in their modern Afrikaner nomination. The Nationalist Party comes to power in 1948, and you have what is a Boer Republic, really, until it crumbles in 1994, just a few years ago. But now, in many ways, the Boer War is passing into historical irrelevance, which is rather different from just passing into a remote historical past, which is a rather different thing, because the people who were neglected, even taken for granted by both sides in the Boer War, are now the dominant people in South Africa and are the people who dominate the government. That is the black African community, who are 3/4 of the South African population. The Boers are, or Afrikaners, as we must now call them. I believe the word Boer has recently been outlawed, ironically by a black government, as racist. The Boers are a very interesting group, rather like the Quebecois. They had been in Africa so long, they might almost be considered white natives, white Africans. And it's ironical that the great major war of this high imperial time for the British was not against non-white indigenes or against another great colonial European power, but against this strange group of long-established non-British white settlers.